Municipal Services Building. If you have questions, please call 818-548-2140. At 12 noon, the Community Police Partnership Advisory Committee will meet in the Police Community Room. For details, please call 818-548-4818. That evening, the Civil Service Commission will meet at 5 p.m. in City Council chambers. For details, please call 818-548-2110. From 5:30 to 7:30 p.m., the Crescenta Valley Chamber of Commerce is hosting a Taste of the Foothills event at the Ralph's Marketplace Shopping Center, 2629 Foothill Boulevard. For questions, please call 818-248-4957. Thursday, November 15th, Arts and Culture Commission will meet at 2 p.m. in City Council chambers. For details, please call 818-937-7817. At 5 p.m., Design Review Board Number 2 will hold a special meeting in Room 105 of the Municipal Services Building. For more information, please call 818-548-2140. At 7:30, the Central Library will host author Wendelin van Drenen as she discusses her book, Flipped, selected by children's librarians nationwide as one of the top 100 children's novels of all time. More information is available at 818-548-2035. From now until November 16th, Community Services and Parks will be collecting canned and dried foods for our Thanksgiving food drive. Please drop off the non-perishable food items in the donation boxes located throughout City Hall. For more information, you may call 818-548-3775. On Saturday, November 17th, the Parks and Open Space Foundation is hosting their last Wilderness Workday of the year. Join us at Duke-Median Wilderness Park from 8 a.m. to 12 noon. For questions, please call 818-548-3795. Glendale Youth Alliance would like to announce an ongoing fundraising opportunity with Lexus of Glendale. The $15 purchase gets you a car wash valid at $19.95, a free gift from Lexus, and you get to enjoy all the amenities the Lexus lobby has to offer. The best part is 100% of the proceeds will benefit Glendale Youth Alliance programs. To purchase your car wash at the discounted price, visit Lexus of Glendale and mention you are purchasing for GYA. If you prefer to purchase through GYA, contact Tina Osborne at 818-548-2714. Durand Gardens is still accepting applications for the new affordable home ownership program for first-time moderate-income home buyers. Let's go to Sonam Radian for more information on these centrally located homes.
The City of Glendale Housing Authority and Heritage Housing Partners have just completed Durand Gardens. Durand Gardens is a 57-unit affordable housing community. Townhomes are available from 1 to 4 bedrooms at approximately $230,000 to $315,000 in price range. If you are a first-time home buyer, which means you haven't owned a home since January 2009, and you qualify as a moderate-income family, please apply now. Applications are available at durandapplication.com. These homes were designed to be energy efficient so you could save on your monthly utility bills. Other features include internal landscaped courtyards, adjacent to new public park with children's play areas, nearby to area jobs, retail, and schools. Don't miss this great opportunity to become a home buyer in the heart of Glendale. Availability is limited, so apply now.
Stay connected with Glendale's exciting news and events by following My Glendale on Twitter. That's it for this week's edition of Glendale's Look Ahead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Good evening and welcome to the November 14th meeting of the Civil Service Commission. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Gantis,
Present.
Commissioner Gregorian,
Here.
Chair Devine,
Here.
Commissioner Gazarian.
Here.
Okay. And what's next, please?
Minutes?
Is there a motion to accept the minutes as written?
So moved.
Second?
I wasn't here,
Oh,
so I
wasn't
won't
here.
be able
Okay.
to.
Second. Okay, we'll accept the minutes by unanimous consent with no objections. Next item, please.
One abstention.
And one abstention. Next item, please.
Oral communications?
I have no cards. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Recruitment and examination report.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a note and file item that indicates the recruitment load. The report, as you know, addresses the both prospective and current recruitments that we're working on, and if we have an opening filing date and a close date, as well as dates of the examination processes, they are indicated on this report. Again, this is note and file. If you have any questions, be happy to try and answer them for you.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Eligible lists established.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this report, again, is note and file. It indicates the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting, which was approximately 2 weeks ago. We have, as you can see, the establishment of 4 lists, all of those promotional, and there's one list, layoff list, which was established due to a layoff in the classification of laborer. That's a second round of layoffs that we're doing, primarily affecting the Water and Power Department, which had some bumping action into the Public Works and Parks Department, which is where that particular layoff is being effectuated. The other lists, again, are traditional recruitment lists that have come about as a result of recruitment processes. As you can see, the one column has the total number of applications, and the column on the far right indicates the total number of individuals who made it onto the eligibility list. And if you have questions on this report, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Okay, are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll first of all let the record show that Commissioner Manukian has arrived.
I'm sorry.
Commission tonight. And we'll move on to the next item, please.
Class specification for approval, senior investigator.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a revision of the class specification for the senior investigator classification. As you know, this is a very key position in our operation. It works out of the city auditor's office. So it's an independent position separate from human resources and the other operating departments. This specification has not been revised since 2004, and that's, I believe, when the position was initially conceived. And there aren't really too many substantive changes, although we do have some minor changes relating to responsibilities relative to the position making recommendations. When this classification was first envisioned, we weren't entirely clear on the full scope of responsibilities, and I think the focus now, after having an individual in the job and seeing how it's worked over the past 7 or 8 years, is that we want to focus on this individual being more of a fact finder as opposed to a fact finder and recommender. That makes sense, but anyway, so we did somewhat hone down the area where recommendations are actually being made. Other than that, we have tried to beef up the minimum qualifications a bit. You'll see the knowledge, skills, and abilities reflect some additional areas that we're focusing on. We've increased the years of experience requirement from 4 years to 5 years, and we're requiring or indicating a experience in the public sector desirable. Outside of that, again, the changes are somewhat moderate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on this. We also have Michelle Flynn, who is the city auditor here. This position reports to her. So, questions. can answer them for you.
Any questions? Mr.
Yes.
DeGroni?
Well, according to this chart, city auditor is in charge of this senior investigator. Is that correct?
Yes.
According to it, yeah. But my question is going to be this task that this person is going to implement and do. So the report goes directly to who? To city manager office, or to the auditor, or city council, or human resources? And
Commissioner Gregorian, that's a very,
Department.
very good question. The reports or the investigations that the senior investigator does are generally, if it's done involving a particular department, it'll be addressed to that department head with a CC to the city auditor, the director of human resources, and the city attorney, and that's typically how it goes. So the report is done. You know, a good example would be if there's an allegation of theft or something like that in a particular department, the individual will go and do that investigation and make findings and provide that those findings to the department head within that particular department.
Okay, do you have a question? I just wanted to find out why this position, since it looks like primarily with personnel matters, why it's not located in human resources rather than the internal auditor's office.
Well, Chair Devine, that's a good question, and I will say this position does work very closely with myself and the members of my staff. But again, when it was conceived originally, we thought it would be good to have this position in a truly independent fashion, and there's no department or section or work unit that we believe is more independent than our internal audit operation. Again, the internal audit operation is not within finance, it's not within HR or anything. It's truly independent. The city auditor's only reporting relationship is to the city manager. And while most of what this individual will be doing are the traditional employment type investigations, again, we feel that this model is most effective in affording the most independence by having it there as opposed to within our operation. And the other thing is, years ago, most of these employment type investigations were done by my department and my staff. And the way my department is organized is that the analysts and the staff are generalists. They do recruitment. They do. They're basically assigned to particular departments, and they develop a working relationship with those departments. They may do recruitment for that particular department, engage in employee relations issues with that department, deal with the disciplinary issues, the labor relations things that come up, and we felt that if you have a circumstance where something or someone in that department needs to be investigated, it could be a little awkward having that person who's somewhat embedded in that department, who has that working relationship, to also be the one to go in and have to investigate those people or those persons. So that's kind of more or less the idea.
Outstanding answer and well understood. Thank you. Commissioner Manukian.
Just a quick question. Is this individual also handle workman's comp issues and things like that, or it's just that has a different investigator?
Commissioner Manukian, this would be, if there were an allegation of fraud of some sort or that someone's abusing workers' comp, we may assign them to do that. But in the workers' compensation process, we have a staff of adjusters, and it's their job to sort of screen any claim that's filed and do, I would say, a preliminary review of whether or not that's a valid claim or not. And if there's any indication of fraud, it can either be handled through the senior investigator or through our own investigation process, separate or apart. So.
Okay. That's all the questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Devine. Mr. Dole, to what extent does this position infringe or otherwise dilute the powers vested in the internal affairs bureaus of the police department and/or the fire department, I see that you have put in the minimum requirement skills and abilities related to the provisions of the POBR and the FOBR, and you refer to the awkwardness of those within a specific department engaging in investigation having to do with coworkers, yet we all know that we have internal affairs departments in the police department and others perhaps that actually do that sensitive and difficult task. So I'm curious if their powers are now somewhat limited by this yet another independent investigative agency, and ultimately whether or not the employee or any alleged employee suspect of any misconduct would be now subject to two separate investigative mechanisms instituted against him or her.
Commissioner Gazarian, thank you for the question. It's a good one, and I'm glad you asked it. The Internal Affairs Bureau of the Police Department really is unique, and they're the only department in the entire city of the 14 or 15 departments we have that have that mechanism. So the way this position has coexisted with that one is that typically the Internal Affairs Bureau will do the investigations within the police department, specifically those of sworn officers. Typically, if there's a non-sworn situation, that may overlap into senior investigators' function. But for the most part, the police department and Internal Affairs Bureau would do their own. If there is a overlap or need for that, or if Internal Affairs is too busy, they don't have the staff, then I could foresee a circumstance where this individual could be brought in to help out. But for the most part, the intent is not to displace the Internal Affairs Bureau. And the reason we've included information relative to POBAR is just to have an understanding of peace officer rights. In case any of the investigations this individual might spill over into the police department, where they have to ask questions or interview a sworn officer, because sometimes we'll have situations where, as an example, city employee will have some contact with law enforcement for some off-duty misconduct or something like that, and there will be instances where we'll have to go ahead and have them interview the cop or whoever who might have arrested someone, something like that. We just want to make sure that this individual has a appreciation for peace officer Bill of Rights issues. But by no means do they have to be an expert, and by no means do we expect this person to displace that bureau.
And to the extent that they are accountable to the city auditor's office or under the direction of the city auditor, hypothetically, if we have a peace officer who goes through an Internal Affairs Bureau investigation, do you envision any scenario where thereafter there would be a separate investigation by the senior investigator under the direction of the city auditor, or that would not be the case?
Commissioner Gazarian, no, I couldn't envision there being a second investigation. Okay. Unless a new issue came up unrelated to the original one. But for the most part, again, if we're talking about misconduct on duty, off duty, involving a police officer, that would be handled by Internal Affairs.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Unanimous consent without objection. Ms. Flynn is free to go. Okay, next item, please.
Class specification and job bulletin for approval, Chief Information Officer.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is both a class specification and job bulletin for your approval for a newly established classification of Chief Information Officer. This is coming to you as a result of the retirement of our, or the pending retirement of our current Director of Information Services. The Director of Information Services is the department head who oversees the Information Services Department. This is basically the oversight of all of the technology and technological support throughout the city. We're choosing to not only change the title, but establish a new classification for this position as we prepare to go out and recruit for this position. The title of Chief Information Officer, we're finding that this is more of a contemporary name for this particular function. It's a little broader than the existing department head title that we would have, and it encompasses more areas, and truly acts as the advisor on all matters technology related to the whole organization. As you might expect, hiring a position like this in a city government, a full-service city government such as Glendale's, is going to be a pretty important undertaking. As we have a police department, we have a fire department, all the related technology associated with that, the radio system, the communication systems, both with our Verdugo system and our police and fire departments, is significant. We also have a water and power utility, as you know, which has just recently embarked on a major upgrade of its metering throughout the organization. In addition to that, just our whole financial system, the budget, the payroll system, our enterprise resource process system is very, very complex, and we're in need of someone with immense talents for this position. Thus, again, the title change and the emphasis on this position will be ideally attracting somebody with exceptional skills. Our plan will be to begin this recruitment during the month of December, and hopefully go through the process January, February, and have someone on board by around March of next year. The current incumbent is retiring at the end of January, so we hope to make this happen, and so there's not much of a lag between the time that he retires and the new person comes on board. Again, you're seeing both the specification tonight as well as the bulletin, and as you know, all executive recruitments bulletins do need to come before the commission. And again, the bulletin is a pretty good reflection of what's in the specification. The bulletin also addresses the selection process that we've set forth, and we anticipate a lot of applicants, and we anticipate having a multi-phase interview process involving both professional experts in this IT field, as well as some of our internal executives and other users of the Information Services Department. So with that, you have both the bulletin and the specification. If you have questions, be happy to try and answer them. As you've noted, Mr. Ochoa is here. This position will report directly to the city manager. So with that, if you have questions.
I have a very small question.
Okay.
I'm curious, may drive on city business, depending on the needs of the position, would that be driving the person in their own vehicle, or would they be provided a city vehicle for this position?
For this, Commissioner Kazarian, for this position, they would be driving their own vehicle.
And
Reason to have an assigned city vehicle.
see. And is there a minimum requirement of what sort of liability insurance, or is that something that the city provides for while they're on the job, running around doing things for the benefit of the city? Or is that too much detail I'm asking?
Probably too much detail.
Just caught my eye, that's all.
And that's boilerplate language on most bulletins. It wouldn't be what I would say an essential function if we had a great candidate who was unable to get a license due to a disability of some sort. That would be something that we would be able to look beyond. But essentially, as the department head for all things technological, this person would have to have the ability to visit various work sites and
Naturally.
as well as, we would expect them to participate in networking functions and things like that. And our department heads do receive a small automobile allowance for such things. So.
Okay. I think Mr. Gazarian was volunteering to drive this individual. That's what it was, wasn't it?
In response, if I may.
As you wish.
In response to your question, city is self-insured, and if there was an incident resulting from something that was within the scope of the employment, then that would be covered by the city's self-insurance policy.
Okay.
Even though for commissioners?
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
I have two quick ones. Why is the salary range omitted from the bulletin?
Chair Devine, the salary range is omitted because we have not taken that to council yet. That's going to go on November the 27th. So we have a general idea of where we want to place that salary range, and I think we're looking at a top step of approximately $13,800 per month.
The other question, I know you explained it kind of quickly, is to the change of the title. This is a department, I know most all the other department heads are director of such and such, and this one is changed to Chief Information Officer. What was the reasoning behind the title change from director to Chief Information Officer?
Chair Devine, it really is a reflection of where the industry is going. As you might expect, before we do any recruitments of this sort, we go out and look at what other cities have done, and we try and look at those cities that are more contemporary, that are more or less on the cutting edge, and we certainly want to look at the salary, see if we're going to be competitive before we go out. And what we were finding is a move away from the director of for this particular function, and this title, for lack of a better term, is what we're seeing more. It's a more contemporary reflection of the duties of the position.
Okay. Your motion?
Just a quick comment. I do agree. I mean, even in the private sector, that is the title that's being widely used. The other point that I just wanted to make, that we're asking this guy to
Or woman.
or woman, absolutely, to know all these different, each one of these, fields by itself is, so that 13,000,
It's not enough.
It's a tall order.
yeah, because trying to know each individual field, it's good luck. I hope we get the right person.
It is. When you start talking about, a lot of people are very techie, when it comes to computers and PCs and even, infrastructure systems, but you start talking about, radios and communication systems and telephones and things like that, it's going to be hard to find, that.
Are we still pursuing that ISIS system, or?
Absolutely.
Okay. That in itself is okay. That's all. Move to approve?
Second. Second. Been moved and seconded. It's unanimous consent without objection. Okay, move on. The next item.
Report on proposed charter amendments to civil service rules and regulations.
Okay, what I'd like to suggest to my colleagues and see if they'll go along with it, this item may take some time. I know that I have several questions, and there's going to be a PowerPoint. We do have a representative of the police department here and two people that are involved in the two closed session items, which, based on our past experience, have gone very quickly. So I propose, if it's okay, to take those two items, the closed session items, out of order so they can go home and not have to sit through a long PowerPoint presentation.
I agree.
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, with that, would you please read item number...
We're going
We need to turn off the cameras first.
we need to read it into the record, and then we will go into closed session. So would you please read item number 12 into the record?
The items to be discussed in closed session: public employee appointments, lower qualifications transfers. We have two positions for the position of Community Service Officer Custody.
Okay, and with that, we are going to go into closed session. We will be reporting out, and also we will be concluding the meeting on camera with the rest of the items. So with that, I'll ask anybody that's not involved with the closed session items to temporarily sequester themselves, and we will call you back at the conclusion.
Back on?
Okay, we're back in session. Reporting out from the closed session, there were 2 items, and the commission unanimously approved both items. And with that, we'll get back on the regular agenda and ask Mr. I'm sorry.
Are we ready?
Before we proceed, may I ask you how long will this presentation take? And are we going to vote on anything? Because I have not had an opportunity to review materials I received earlier this afternoon.
Okay, we are, as far as how long, we'll let Ms. Varpetian indicate that. We're not voting on this. It's just for our information only.
Okay.
And actually, it was supposed to go on the ballot in April, but last night I learned that this is a negotiation item, all these changes, and because of that, we're looking at probably another 2 years before it would be eligible to go back on the ballot.
Okay.
So it's really academic tonight, and it's just for our information and any input we may have.
All right, because I do have to be at another function, and I'm curious as to the length of it.
I think the length of it will depend on the number of questions from the commission. My presentation is only 6 slides,
As in 6 minutes or less?
less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Let's take a shot.
My questions will take about an hour and a half.
8 slides.
Okay, Ms. Varpetian. Well, I think we need to read the item into the record again.
Yeah.
Report on proposed charter amendments to civil service rules and regulations.
Ms. Varpetian.
Thank you for the opportunity to present this item to you. As you may know, the City Council is considering placing on the ballot certain charter provisions for amendment. Charter provisions must go to the city electorate if it is going to be amended. In addition to the items that are before you, the City Council is considering a number of other items that are not related to the Civil Service Commission, and for that reason, they are not before you tonight. But if you're interested in those, we can certainly provide that to you at some other time. So the items that are relevant to the Commission are the following, and I would invite you to ask questions at any time. I think both Mr. Doyle and I will try to give you the answers that you need. There is a PowerPoint that we've prepared to help us guide through that process. The first item that is before you has to do with the bumping rights. And what that means is that the charter requires bumping based on seniority across departments. What that means is that if a position is abolished, then the person who is most senior in that position would have the ability to bump down either within the same department or bump to a different department as long as that person is within that same classification. And then that person also has the ability to bump back to a position that they may have held prior to the position that they hold now. The city recently went through that process, and we found that the bumping process was quite disruptive, mostly because people were being moved to departments where they may not have developed a certain degree of expertise, even though they held the same title. It was somewhat problematic because they were accustomed to doing a job a particular way. So what this amendment would do is would allow the Civil Service Commission the authority to amend the bumping requirements as necessary and eliminate the bumping across departments to avoid the inefficiencies as I just described. And again, what that would do is remove the requirement from the charter, place it within the rules so that in the future, if you wanted to amend it to go back to the way it was or amend it any other way, that the city would not have to go through an entire amendment process. The next item has to do with the rule of 3. And what the charter currently requires is that the appointing authority, after candidates have gone through an exam process, the appointing authority is given names of the top 3 candidates in that process. What we are finding is that that number may be limiting, requiring the appointing authority to choose from only 3 individuals becomes somewhat problematic, considering the pool of qualified applicants. What this amendment is proposing to do is to, again, remove the requirement from the charter, place it in the civil service rules, and allow the Civil Service Commission to develop those rules to something other than the rule of 3, possibly the rule of 5, which acts very much like the rule of 3, except instead of the appointing authority receiving 3 names, he or she would get 5 names. Another way of doing that would be the rule of the band, and this would require that individuals who fall within a particular band would then go to the next level, which would be the interview process with the appointing authority. The 4th amendment we're calling budgetary reallocation of a position. And how this works is that when someone is given additional responsibilities and is expected to act outside of their classification so that a promotion would be expected, then the department goes to the City Council, requests the budgetary reallocation of the position, and then what happens next is that the HR department is required to open up the recruitment and go through a recruitment process. And what we're finding is that it creates some redundancy and confusion in the process. What we're proposing to do is that amend the charter to allow for budgetary reallocation of a position and forego the mandatory requirement of the recruitment process. The last item that is that the City Council considered had to do with the appeals. The charter currently requires that the Civil Service Commission commence a proceeding to hear fully and determine a matter within 2 weeks. As you can imagine, that is a very difficult thing to do these days, mainly because the nature of the appeals have become incredibly complex. The number of witnesses have increased, and scheduling becomes somewhat difficult as well. So what we do in this instance, trying to work within the spirit of the requirements of the charter, is that we schedule the initial hearing within 2 weeks of the appeal, and then at least initiate the hearing. But obviously we can't fully hear it and determine the matter within the 2 weeks that's the requirement in the charter. What we're proposing to do here is to replace the 2-week requirement with some reasonable time frame after the filing of the appeal. We will still endeavor to bring the matter to the Commission as early as possible, but really allow the Commission the ample time that it needs to go through the hearing process. The amendments that are being proposed here trigger what is called the Myers-Milius and Brown Act. That is a requirement in state law, and what that says is that when you are proposing a change in the working conditions, we are required to go through a meet and confer process with the associations. What that means is that we need to schedule meetings with each of the employee associations. We have started that process because we were given that direction from City Council, but as you could see, some of these issues are fairly meaty, and it's not the type of thing that we could quickly agree to and dismiss. And when we realize that given the short time frames, when the matter has to go back to Council for Council to take action to put the items on the ballot, we recognize that it just would not be possible for us to do. But because we were given the direction and because the items are significant, Council may consider placing this item on a special election. They may also consider placing it at the next election, which would be in 2015. But the time frame, just to give you an idea, council would need to take action on these items by December 11th. And given the Thanksgiving break, we just don't see us having met with all 5 associations in time to have a report back to council for them to take action. This last item was not before council, and it was something that was generated through the commission. If you recall, at the last meeting, we were asked to do some study and report back on a possible amendment. What the charter currently requires, and we've provided a supplemental report to you, albeit not in a great deal of time for you to have studied it in full, but the current charter requirement requires that the full commission or an authorized representative to hear the appeal. If the matter is heard by an authorized representative, and we understand that to mean a subset of the commission or an outside hearing officer, then that must come back to the full commission for a final determination. So the requirement is that the full commission must take action on all disciplinary appeal hearings. There was a proposal made that perhaps when you have a subset with 3 commissioners hearing a matter that and all 3 agree unanimously on the findings, that perhaps should not come back to the full commission. The recommendation, both from our office and from Human Resources, is to leave the item in its present form, mainly because we see the commission's, one of the core functions of the commission, to hear these matters and rule on them. And for that purpose, for that reason, we think that additional step of bringing it back to the full commission adds another perspective that is beneficial, not just to the appointing authority, but to the appellant as well. But that is something that the commission can discuss, and if it is your desire to move that up to the city council, we can certainly do that by way of a request from the Civil Service Commission. In connection with this, we did look to a number of our neighboring cities. I have to say that we weren't successful in reaching many of them, but at least 4 that we spoke with that have a Civil Service Commission, we spoke to a few who do not have a commission, their process is exactly like ours. They allow the full commission to review a matter. Alternatively, they can send it out to a hearing officer, but if it's a hearing officer that makes the recommendation, it does have to come back to the full commission. I do have to put in a quick plug because we had an intern in our office who was instrumental in the research, Hartunian, so I do thank him for the contribution he made to this report. So that's the extent of the report I have, and I'm happy to answer. I think we're both happy to answer questions.
See no hands reaching for the ceiling. Oh, Mr. Gaddis.
Well, I understand why some of these have come up. Clearly, the bumping rights, as I've even heard through the grapevine, it's been a very, very difficult process. It's not ever really been as fully implemented as it was with these last round of layoffs. And I know for a fact in the Treasurer's Finance Office, it was really devastating because they basically have all new people in there that knew nothing about what was going on. So I clearly think that makes some sense to at least allow it to be much more flexible. I don't have a problem with the Rule of 3 being more flexible. I do have a problem getting rid of the Rule of 3. I just think a Rule of 3 makes a lot of sense myself, but that's not what we're asked here to do. The budgetary reallocation of a position is one that it's really difficult. There's no promotions in civil service, and you have to take a position, redo it, and then send it out for competition, and it's created some hard feelings. I know that I've heard that in my years here, that people believe that they're going to be able to get a position when generally, if it creates the list of 3, and if that person that sought to be on there to be promoted because they've done a good job, then they're generally going to get the position, and it creates hard feelings. I think we need to allow management that much more flexibility. The appeals process itself, the 2-week period, I have trouble with that. And the trouble I have, we clearly have trouble with the 2 weeks. Leaving it as a reasonable time, I think, just begs an issue to be brought up on these very contentious, as you point out quite rightly, appeals. It would seem to me to make more sense to do the appellate, to reflect in what we're going to amend to what we actually do. If we can commence the hearing, if it needs a month instead of 2 weeks, to allow us that time, and that we then complete the hearing as expeditiously as possible, to be much more clear that we don't have a time frame on the hearing, as the 2 weeks does create a problem in terms of completing it, but that it be commenced at a certain period of time. Otherwise, it seems to me that it allows somebody, these things may go 2 months, 3 months, and because we're busy or we have something to do, I think we need to be able to get to this hearing process. I do believe the 2 weeks is a little tight. I think a month is not unreasonable, 2 months, but at least to start it, and then say actually that the completion of it will be done as expeditiously as possible, or something like that, so that we're not opening ourselves up to any appellate issues on that. With respect to the appeal hearing procedures, I am firmly in favor of keeping it as it is. I think if we allow 3 to make the decision, clearly it becomes a problem, because then there are 2 commissioners that aren't technically doing their job. And if they're not on a hearing, while I know what Mr. Gazarian is going to say, and I understand his position that you're not hearing it, I just don't think that that's appropriate. Clearly, you're going to get recommendations, but I think that the final decision, everybody has to be involved in the final decision, because, as I think that is said, it is the core function of the thing. And in reading the report, I note that in a couple of occasions, I don't know which ones, there are 2 of them, they require the full commission to do the hearings. Well, if we had that procedure over the last 13 years, if I ever thought I was going to shoot myself, I would have shot myself, because full commission cannot possibly hear each and every one of these. So I think our procedure is much more efficient than having a full commission hear these. But my guess is in those cities, they don't have anywhere near the workload that we have. So I would recommend that stay in place with those.
Any other comments? None. I have a couple of questions. Back on the bumping rights, I read the charter, and I had a hard time finding where it said in the charter anything differently than we're doing now. I think it was section 9B. And so I didn't understand this proposed change in terms of what it's accomplishing, in view of the fact that 9B already sets forth what can be done. So if we can get a little explanation on that.
Yes, and Chair Devine, members of the Commission, the issue arose when in 1959 there was a charter amendment, and as part of the, what we did was we looked at when we look at statutory construction, we look at the actual words of the section, and to find any clarification in case there's any ambiguity, we go back to the legislative history. And in 1959, when the amendment was made, as part of the arguments in favor of the amendment, there was a clear request that the rules allow for cross-departmental bumping based on seniority, and allowing someone to bump back to a former position. It's the issue of cross-departmental bumping that causes the trouble, because while you may have a generic title like administrative analyst, an administrative analyst in the police department performs a very different function than an administrative analyst at GWP. And that's the type of bumping that is currently allowed, both per the charter, the legislative history, and our rules. And to amend that, we do have to go through a charter amendment.
Mr. Chairman, can I amend basically what this does is take it out of the charter and put it in the rules, which makes us more flexible. if in fact these bumping rights, as we go down, if there's more layoffs, are really creating a problem, we can hear this and the commission can make this change. It's a rule change. The commission can make this change, subject to, as I guess, approval of the city council. But it's not subject to just going to the charter. It's not changing the rights. It's changing where it is and how it could be changed later on.
Okay. On the rule of three, I again agree with the concept. I would, though, be looking at the banding rather than a rule of 5 or rule of 7. One of the things that came to mind was when we were considering the recruitment in the police department for female candidates. And one of the things brought up at that time by the chief was in terms of why they haven't been successful in getting as many female candidates as they wanted was because of this rule of 3, that if they had the ability to go to a banding process, get more candidates in there, that he felt that would be a partial solution to the problem. So I agree with the concept, but I would go along with the banding rather than a rule of 3 or a rule of 5.
Again, Mr. Chairman, this is changing it from a charter to the rules, so if that wanted to be changed, same thing, changed by the commission, subject to, rather than being in the charter. It's much more flexible.
Okay.
Even though I disagree with you.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, Commissioner Manukian had to leave. He said he had an appointment. So,
okay. On the civil service appeals, I agree with the comments made by Commissioner Gaddis, especially in terms of rather than setting a fixed time for the process, to amend the process or amend the wording so that it fits the actual process we're going through, giving dates and whatnot. So I believe that's a good amendment or a good solution to look at for that. On the last item concerning the full commission hearing cases, I've made my concerns known on that several times. I know that my fellow commissioners don't agree with me on it. I know that Ms. Varpetian and I have had a long conversation concerning the options there, and I think the one where we came up with, if we have a situation where there are 3 commissioners that hear it, they have a unanimous vote on it, unanimous consent on the decision, that to bring it back for the other 2 commissioners who have not heard it, and quite frankly may not have the time to go through the record and really study what was said and what was done there. I think it's not fair to the appellant or the appointing authority to have a decision made that could be possibly changed or amended by 2 people that weren't involved in the process. With that being said, based on comments I've heard from my other commissioners, that's probably going to be an issue that's not going to go before council, because I don't think this commission, constituted as it is, will go along with that concept.
For the record, Chair Devine, you stated that your fellow commissioners do not agree with you. I didn't want to belabor the point. You do recall that I actually do agree with you. As Commissioner Gant has stated, I remain troubled by the duty imposed upon me that I have gladly accepted, but it does not contemplate me casting a vote on an item that I have not been privy to in its entirety before me, but rather I would be relying on my fellow co-commissioners, as my fellow co-commissioners would be relying upon me. I'm not sure that is the best way to ensure one vote, one commissioner, one independent vote, one commissioner to any litigant coming before this commission. But I was not prepared to discuss this matter this session. That's why I suggested that we table the matter. If there's anything to be voted on, short of voting on it, I'll just say at the moment that I still remain troubled by it, and I will ask the Commission to revisit it in the near future when I've spent some time contemplating potential alternatives for the Commission to consider.
Okay, with that comment, I would ask, there's at least 2 of us now, and I haven't heard from Mr. Gregorian on that issue, but I think...
Which one, Mr. Chair?
As far as the full commission hearing cases, especially in cases where there's been 3 panel hearing?
No, I go for the 5.
You go for the 5. All right, so at this point, it would be 2-2, but I think it's worthwhile. We haven't heard from Commissioner Manukian on this, and let's follow Mr. Gazarian's suggestion and table this and bring it up when we have a full commission and everybody's had a chance to review the item.
And that would be fine. We would just look to your direction as to when on the agenda you'd like for us to bring that back. Being mindful of the requirements with council as it relates to the action they must take. We don't think that we're going to be able to get it on the April 2013 agenda, but again, it's an item that we would have to meet and confer, and it's something that we would have to then take to council, see if they agree. Let me reverse the order of that. We would have to, if it is the will of the commission to amend the rule, then we would have to take it to city council. We'd need to get direction from them. If they agree that the charter should be amended, we would then have to begin a meet and confer process with the associations, and then finally put it on the ballot for an amendment.
Okay, and with that in mind, and based on the fact that you've got to go through this process, meet, confer, and whatnot with the other 4 items, what would be your suggestion on the amount of time we would have before we need to bring it back to decide whether we're going to send it to council?
After the death of you and I.
Chair Devine, I want to concur with Ms. Varpetti and what she said about the meet and confer process. This is a very key element of getting the ball moving on any type of amendment to the civil service sections contained within the charter. We've done research on this. The question came up, could we put the items on the ballot and complete the meet and confer prior to April? The answer to that is no. The meet and confer would have to be done in order to put these items on the ballot. And what that means is we would have to come to some form of agreement with all 5 of our bargaining units on each of these items in order to see all of them go.
Let me cut this short because I know Commissioner Kazarian is on a tight time schedule here. What I'm asking is, knowing that it needs to go to meet and confer, as does the other 4 items that we discussed earlier, the question now is, what would be the time frame for bringing it back to council, to this commission, so we could then vote either to or not to send it to council, so they could set in process whether or not we're going to need a meet and confer?
I think we probably want to bring it back to your next meeting, if that gives you enough time to study the issue. Just so you know, because we knew that this was an item that was of concern, we've included it as part of our discussion on the other items, and we've only met with 4 of the 5. And they have been preliminary meetings, so I'm not in a position to share with you what their sentiments are, again, because it's something that they have to study as well. So,
with that in mind, I agree. Our next meeting, I believe, is December 12th. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, Commissioner Gazarian, would that give you sufficient time to look at that item, and we'll talk about it on December 12th?
Yes.
Okay.
all right, we'll do
Well,
that.
that's that. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to your intern for a job well done. Next item, please. Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the agenda forecast is a note and file item. As you're aware, your schedule relative to disciplinary appeals continues to be heavy. There are 3 appeal hearings going on currently, which is taking up a lot of your time. The upcoming meetings, as far as our public regular meetings of the Civil Service Commission, we are canceling the November 28th meeting, but we are having the meeting on December the 12th. And in addition to the item that Ms. Varpetian just alluded to, I do anticipate having a brief item having to do with the issue of similar qualifications transfer that Mr. Chair Devine had asked me to bring back. Bring that back on the 12th. Other than that, I can't foresee what other items will be
Okay, well,
forth.
on the 12th, there may be, depending on how deliberations go, there may be an item that hearing panel on one of the disciplinary actions will have a decision on and bring back on the 12th for deliberations on that date. So you can leave that spot open. Okay, any other questions on the agenda forecast? Next item, please. Okay, we're going to postpone that till the next meeting. Next item. Any comments? Seeing none. Next item appears to be adjournment. Is there a move?
Adjourn.
We're adjourned.
December 4th.